A homeless 9-year-old girl, lost in an Alaskan blizzard, stumbled into an abandoned cabin that should have been her grave. But when she pried open a frozen hatch beneath the floor, what she found in that ice-locked tunnel would turn $275 million worth of stolen history into the greatest second-chance story the frozen North had ever witnessed. Before we explore what Maya discovered in that frozen darkness, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The wind screamed across the Alaskan tundra like a living thing, hungry and relentless. It was the kind of cold that didn't just bite, it devoured. The kind that turned breath to ice before it left your lips and made every step feel like your last. Maya Thompson pressed closer to her mother's side, her small frame shaking beneath 3 layers of donated clothing that did little against the 17 below zero temperature. She was 9 years old, though the cold and hunger had made her look younger, her face pale and hollowed, her eyes too old for her years. Her mother, Sarah Thompson, was 31 but looked 50. 2 years of homelessness had carved lines into her face that no amount of sleep could erase. Her hands, once soft from her work as a hospital receptionist, were now cracked and raw, wrapped in torn gloves, held together with duct tape. They had been walking for 3 hours since the shelter in Coldfoot turned them away. Full capacity, no exceptions. The storm had come faster than the weather service predicted, and now they were caught in it, miles from anywhere, with darkness falling like a curtain. The Alaskan wilderness showed no mercy to those unprepared for its brutality. Sarah had learned that lesson the hard way over the past 2 years. She had learned it when their car broke down outside Fairbanks, and they couldn't afford the $800 repair. She had learned it when the temporary housing program cut their assistance after 6 months. She had learned it every night they spent in shelters that smelled of bleach and desperation, surrounded by other souls the world had forgotten. But tonight was different. Tonight, the cold wasn't just uncomfortable. It was lethal. "Mama," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "I can't feel my feet." Sarah pulled her daughter closer, terror clawing at her chest. She had made so many wrong choices, trusted the wrong people, lost their apartment, lost their car, lost everything. But she couldn't lose Maya. Not her baby. Not like this. The guilt that lived permanently in Sarah's chest tightened like a fist. She had failed as a mother in every way that mattered. Failed to keep a roof over their heads. Failed to keep food in Maya's stomach. Failed to give her daughter the childhood she deserved. "Keep walking, sweetheart," she said, forcing strength into her voice that she didn't feel. "Just keep walking. We'll find something, I promise." But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. There was nothing out here. Just endless white, endless cold, endless emptiness. The road had disappeared beneath the snow an hour ago. The trees were sparse and offered no shelter. They were going to die out here. Sarah knew it, with a certainty that made her want to scream. And the knowing was worse than the cold. Maya had stopped crying 2 hours ago. That scared Sarah more than anything. Children cried when they were cold and tired. When they stopped crying, it meant they were giving up. It meant their bodies were shutting down, conserving energy for the final desperate hours of life. Sarah's own feet were numb inside her boots. Boots that were 2 sizes too big and had holes in the soles she had stuffed with newspaper. Her lungs burned with every breath of the frozen air. Her face felt like stone. The skin stretched tight and brittle. But she kept moving because stopping meant death. And she refused to let Maya die alone in this frozen wasteland. The wind shifted suddenly, driving snow directly into their faces. Sarah turned to shield Maya, and that's when she saw it through the whiteout. A shape, dark against the white. Low and curved, like something carved from the earth itself. "Mama," Maya said, her voice thin and weak, tugging at Sarah's coat with fingers that barely had strength left. "Look." Sarah squinted through frozen eyelashes, and saw it too. A structure. Man-made. maybe 20 yards ahead. She didn't question it, didn't wonder why something stood out here, in the middle of nowhere. Didn't care if it was real or a hallucination brought on by hypothermia. She just pulled Maya forward with renewed desperation, her legs moving through snow that reached past her knees. Each step felt like moving through concrete. Sarah's muscles screamed in protest, but she pushed forward. 15 yards, 10 yards, 5 yards. As they stumbled closer, the shape became clearer. It wasn't a traditional cabin. It was something stranger, older, almost prehistoric in its design. The walls were made of stone and packed earth, reinforced with timber that had weathered to the color of ash. The structure was built half into the ground itself, using the earth as insulation against the brutal Arctic winters. The roof was curved and low, covered in sod and snow, designed to blend into the landscape. It was an igloo-style cabin, the kind built by miners and trappers in the early 1900s, when survival meant working with nature rather than against it. The door was made of thick wood, darkened by age and weather, frozen shut by decades of ice. Sarah threw her weight against it once. Nothing. Twice. The ice cracked but held. 3 times. Her shoulder screamed in pain. On the 4th try, throwing every ounce of desperation she possessed into the impact, the door gave way with a crack like breaking bone. They fell inside, tumbling across the threshold in a tangle of limbs and frozen fabric. The wind tried to follow them in, howling like something alive and angry at being denied its prey. Sarah kicked the door shut behind them, and the wind slammed it closed with finality. The silence was immediate and shocking. After hours of the wind's constant roar, after the relentless howl that had burrowed into Sarah's skull like a living thing, the quiet felt almost holy. It felt like stepping into a church, like the world had suddenly remembered how to be still. Sarah fumbled in her pocket with fingers that barely worked, searching for the small flashlight she had salvaged from a gas station trash can 3 weeks ago. Her hands shook so badly, it took 3 tries to grip it. The beam flickered to life, weak and yellow, but enough to see, enough to hope. The interior was one large room, maybe 20 feet across and 15 feet deep. The walls were lined with wooden shelves, most empty, some holding rusted cans and tools whose purposes Sarah couldn't identify. A stone fireplace sat against the far wall, its chimney disappearing into the curved ceiling. The stonework was careful and deliberate. Each rock fitted precisely against its neighbor. In the center of the room stood a small wooden table and 2 chairs, all covered in a thick layer of dust that looked like gray velvet in the flashlight's beam. Everything was frozen solid, the air inside barely warmer than outside, but it was shelter. It was walls. It was a roof. It was the difference between life and death. Sarah dropped to her knees and pulled Maya into her arms. Holding her so tight, the girl gasped for breath. Sarah didn't care. She needed to feel Maya's heartbeat, needed to know her daughter was still alive, still here, still hers. "We're okay," Sarah whispered, tears freezing on her cheeks the moment they fell. "We're okay, baby. We're okay." She repeated it like a prayer, like if she said it enough times, it would become true. Her voice cracked on the words, breaking apart with relief and exhaustion and the weight of 2 years of fear, finally releasing its grip. But Maya wasn't listening. Even in her exhausted, half-frozen state, her 9-year-old curiosity was already working. She was staring at something across the room, her eyes focusing despite the cold that had turned her lips blue. "Mama," she said quietly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "There's blankets." Sarah turned, following her daughter's gaze. In the corner, stacked neatly on a wooden bench, were wool blankets sealed in plastic bags. The plastic was yellowed with age, brittle-looking, but intact. Whoever had lived here last had left supplies. Old supplies, but sealed. protected from the moisture and decay that claimed everything in Alaska eventually. Sarah crawled across the floor, her legs too weak to stand, and reached the bench. She tore one of the plastic bags open with her teeth, her frozen fingers useless for the task. The wool blanket inside was thick and heavy, musty-smelling but dry. Perfectly, miraculously dry. She wrapped it around Maya immediately, cocooning her daughter in the heavy fabric, tucking it around her small body like she was wrapping the most precious gift in the world. Then she grabbed another for herself, and another, and another. She wrapped them both in layers of wool until they looked like small mountains of fabric sitting on the frozen floor. "We need fire," Sarah said, her mind working through the fog of exhaustion, her survival instincts taking over. Now, that immediate death wasn't breathing down their necks. "We need to get warm." She forced herself to stand on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, and moved to the fireplace. The opening was large, designed for both cooking and heating. Inside, she found it stocked with old wood, split and stacked neatly, dry despite the decades. Beside the fireplace sat a metal box, its lid crusted with rust. Sarah pried it open and found matches inside, also sealed in a small plastic bag. The plastic crinkled and cracked when she touched it, falling apart in her hands, but the matches inside were dry. Her hands shook so badly as she struck the first match that it went out immediately. The second match broke in half. The third one she held with both hands, steadying them against each other, and struck it carefully against the side of the box. The flame caught, small and orange and beautiful. She held it to a piece of birch bark she found tucked beneath the wood. The bark caught immediately, flames spreading across its papery surface. She added small twigs, then larger pieces of wood, building the fire carefully, patiently, the way her father had taught her during camping trips, a lifetime ago. Within minutes, a fire was crackling to life, and the room began to lose its death grip of cold. The temperature wouldn't rise quickly, not in a space this large and this frozen, but the fire was life. The fire was hope. Maya crawled closer to the flames, dragging her blankets with her, and sat as close as she dared. Her small hands stretched toward the warmth, like flowers reaching for the sun. Sarah found an old pot hanging on a hook near the fireplace and filled it with snow from just outside the door. She set it near the fire's edge and watched as the snow slowly melted into water. When the water was warm, not hot but warm enough, she made them both drink. The liquid hurt going down Sarah's frozen throat, but it was good pain, pain that meant she was still alive, pain that meant her body still worked. "Who lived here, Mama?" Maya asked, her voice small and tired, muffled by the blankets wrapped around her. Sarah looked around the cabin with new eyes, really seeing it for the first time now that the immediate panic of survival had passed. The walls were solid, expertly built. The shelves were organized, each one labeled in faded handwriting she couldn't read in the dim light. The tools hanging from pegs were arranged by size. The firewood was stacked in perfect rows. The cans on the shelves were lined up with their labels facing forward. This wasn't just a shelter. This was someone's home. Someone who had cared about this place, who had maintained it, who had planned to return. The supplies weren't abandoned carelessly. They were stored deliberately, preserved, protected, like someone had locked up their house before going on a trip and planned to come back next season. But something had stopped them from returning. Years had passed, maybe decades. The dust was too thick, the air too stale, the silence too complete. "I don't know, baby," Sarah said softly, pulling another blanket around her shoulders. "But whoever they were, they just saved our lives." Maya nodded, then curled up beneath the wool blankets, her eyes already closing despite the early hour. Exhaustion claimed children quickly, especially children who had been walking through a blizzard for hours. Her breathing slowed and deepened, and within minutes, she was asleep. Sarah watched her daughter's chest rise and fall, slow and steady, and felt something break inside her. Relief, maybe. Or guilt so profound it felt like drowning. Or just the weight of everything they had lost finally crashing down all at once. 2 years of holding it together, of being strong, of pretending she knew what she was doing, finally caught up with her. She fed more wood into the fire and sat back against the cold stone wall, pulling her blankets tight. Outside, the storm raged on, wind howling like wolves, snow piling against the door. But inside, for the first time in months, they were warm, they were dry, they were safe, they were alive. Sarah didn't sleep that first night. She couldn't. Every creak of the cabin's old timbers made her tense. Every gust of wind that rattled the door made her jump. She kept expecting someone to burst through, to tell them they were trespassing, to send them back into the cold. Or worse, she kept expecting the fire to go out, the wood run out, the cold to seep back in and finish what it started. But the woodpile was larger than she had initially thought, stacked against the entire back wall of the cabin. Whoever had lived here had prepared for long, dark winters. Sarah fed the fire steadily through the night, watching the flames dance and flicker, casting moving shadows across the curved ceiling. As the hours passed and the cabin slowly warmed, Sarah began to notice more details. There were photographs on one shelf, faded and curled at the edges, showing people she didn't recognize standing in front of this very cabin. There was a calendar on the wall, frozen open to March 1991, its pages yellowed and brittle. There was a jacket hanging on a peg near the door, a heavy parka that looked military in design, its fabric stiff with age and cold. 1991. 34 years ago, someone had been here, in March of 1991, and then simply left, or died, or disappeared. Sarah shivered, despite the growing warmth from the fire. By morning, the storm had passed. Pale sunlight filtered through the single small window on the east wall, casting a weak beam across the dusty floor. The light looked almost solid, like you could reach out and touch it, full of dancing dust motes that glittered like snow. Maya woke slowly, blinking in the dim light, confused for a moment about where she was. Sarah saw the fear flash across her daughter's face, that moment of panic that had become Maya's first expression every morning for the past 2 years. The fear of not knowing where they would sleep tonight, what they would eat, whether anyone would hurt them. "I'm here, baby," Sarah said quickly, moving to her daughter's side. Maya relaxed, recognition flooding her features. She sat up, the blankets falling from her shoulders, and looked around the cabin with fresh eyes. Eyes that were rested, eyes that belonged to a child again, instead of a survivor. "Can we stay?" she asked, her voice hopeful in a way that made Sarah's heart ache. Sarah's throat tightened. "For a little while, until the weather clears and we can figure out what to do next." But even as she said it, she knew there was nowhere else to go. The shelters were full. The churches had done all they could. They had no money, no car, no family who would take them in. Sarah's parents were dead. Her sister had cut off contact years ago. Maya's father was in prison in Washington state, serving 15 years for armed robbery. They were alone in the world. This cabin, abandoned and frozen in the middle of nowhere, was the closest thing to a home they had had in 2 years. Maya stood and began exploring, her natural curiosity overcoming her exhaustion, now that warmth and rest had restored some of her strength. She opened drawers in the small dresser near the bed and found old clothes, flannel shirts, and wool socks, all moth-eaten but still usable. She lifted the lids of wooden crates stacked against the wall and discovered tools, nails, rope, and other supplies whose purposes she didn't understand. She ran her hands along the walls, feeling the texture of the stone, tracing the lines of mortar between each carefully placed rock. She examined the photographs on the shelf, studying the faces of strangers who smiled at a camera decades before she was born. And then she found it. In the far corner of the cabin, beneath a woven rug so covered in dust, It looked like part of the floor itself. There was a seam. Maya knelt down and brushed the dust away with her small hands, her fingers leaving trails in the gray powder. The seam formed a square, maybe 3 feet on each side. She traced it carefully, feeling along the edges. "Mama," she called out, her voice filled with the excitement of discovery. "There's something here." Sarah looked up from the fireplace, where she had been arranging more wood. "What do you mean, baby?" "A door," Maya said, brushing away more dust. "In the floor." Sarah crossed the room and knelt beside her daughter. She could see it now clearly in the morning light. A hatch, cut into the floor and fitted so precisely that it was nearly invisible beneath the rug and dust. There was a metal ring set flush with the wood, designed to be pulled up to open the hatch. Sarah's first instinct was to leave it alone. They had shelter. They had warmth. They didn't need to go looking for trouble. But Maya was already grabbing the ring with both hands, her face set with determination. "Maya, wait," Sarah started to say. But Maya pulled. The hatch didn't budge. It was frozen shut, ice having sealed it closed over years or decades of Alaska winters. Maya pulled again, harder this time, her small face reddening with effort. "Let me try," Sarah said, gently moving Maya aside. She gripped the metal ring with both hands, braced her feet against the floor, and pulled. Nothing. She adjusted her grip and tried again, throwing her weight backward. Still nothing. The ice held firm. Then Sarah had an idea. She went to the fire and pulled out a piece of burning wood, holding it by the unburned end. She carried it carefully to the hatch and ran the flames along the seam, melting the ice that sealed it shut. The ice hissed and steamed, turning to water that ran across the floor. After a full minute of melting, Sarah set the wood back in the fire and tried the ring again. This time, with a crack like breaking glass, the hatch moved. Sarah pulled harder, and the hatch lifted, its hinges screaming with rust and disuse. Cold air rushed up from below, colder even than the air in the cabin had been when they first arrived. It smelled strange, not musty like old basements, but clean and sharp, like metal and ice. Maya leaned forward to look down into the darkness below, but Sarah pulled her back. "Wait," Sarah said. "We don't know what's down there." She grabbed the flashlight and shined it into the opening. The beam revealed stone steps leading down into darkness. Rough-cut steps, carved into rock, descending into what looked like a tunnel. "Why would someone build stairs under their cabin?" Maya asked, her voice hushed with wonder. Sarah had no answer. She shined the light as far down as it would reach, but the tunnel curved away after about 15 feet, disappearing into blackness. Her instincts told her to close the hatch, to leave whatever was down there alone. But another part of her, the part that had learned survival, meant taking risks when necessary, wanted to know, needed to know. Because if there were more supplies down there, more food or blankets or anything useful, they needed to find them. "Stay here," Sarah said firmly to Maya. "No," Maya said immediately. "I'm coming with you. Maya, Mama, please, don't leave me alone up here." Sarah looked at her daughter's face, saw the fear there, the desperate need not to be separated, and understood. They had spent 2 years being sent to different areas in shelters because they separated children from adults. They had spent 2 years never knowing if they would be split up permanently. Maya's greatest fear wasn't the dark or the unknown. It was being left behind. "Okay," Sarah said softly, "but stay close to me. And if I say we go back up, we go back up immediately. Understand?" Maya nodded solemnly. Sarah went first, testing each stone step before putting her full weight on it. The steps were solid, carved straight from bedrock, not built, but excavated. She counted 15 steps before the tunnel leveled out. The passage was narrow, maybe 4 feet wide, with a ceiling just tall enough for Sarah to stand upright. The walls were rough stone, natural rock that had been left mostly unworked except where necessary to create the passage. Maya followed close behind, one hand gripping the back of Sarah's jacket, her breathing quick and nervous in the confined space. They walked forward slowly, the flashlight beam dancing ahead of them. The tunnel ran straight for, maybe 30 feet, then took a sharp turn to the right. Sarah paused at the corner, listening. There was no sound, except their own breathing and the soft drip of water somewhere ahead. She turned the corner, and the tunnel opened up. They stood at the entrance to a chamber, carved out of solid rock, maybe 20 feet across and 30 feet deep. But it was what filled the chamber that made Sarah's breath stop in her throat. Wooden crates, dozens of them, maybe 50 or more, stacked neatly in rows that stretched from floor to ceiling. Each crate was maybe 3 feet square, made of dark wood that looked almost black in the flashlight beam, banded with metal straps that had rusted but still held firm. And in front of the crates, spread across the floor like someone had been taking inventory, were items that made no sense. Paintings in ornate gold frames, leaning against the wall, sculptures of bronze and marble sitting on wooden pallets, small boxes that glinted metallically in the light, books bound in leather, stacked in careful piles. Sarah took a step forward, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. This wasn't just someone's storage. This was a collection, a massive, hidden collection of what looked like art and valuables, buried beneath a forgotten cabin in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness. "What is all this?" Maya whispered, her voice small and awed in the echoing chamber. Sarah had no answer. She moved closer to the nearest painting, a portrait of a woman in 18th century dress, her face serene and beautiful, painted with such skill that she looked almost alive. The frame alone looked like it was worth thousands of dollars. She picked up one of the small boxes and opened it carefully. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a necklace, diamonds and rubies that caught the flashlight beam and threw fractured rainbows across the stone walls. Sarah's hands began to shake. She set the box down carefully and looked around at the vast collection surrounding them. Each crate probably held more treasures. Each stack represented a fortune. And all of it was hidden here, beneath a cabin that no one remembered, in a place where no one would ever think to look. "Mama," Maya said, tugging at Sarah's jacket. "What does this mean?" Sarah looked down at her daughter's upturned face, saw the confusion and wonder there, and realized she had no idea how to answer that question. What did it mean? Where had all this come from? Who had hidden it here? And most importantly, why had they never come back for it? A homeless mother and her 9-year-old daughter had stumbled into something far bigger than themselves, something that would change everything. But in that moment, standing in a frozen underground chamber, surrounded by treasures she didn't understand, Sarah only knew one thing for certain: their lives would never be the same again. Sarah stood frozen in the underground chamber, her flashlight beam sweeping across crates that seemed to multiply the longer she looked at them. The air was cold enough that each breath came out in visible puffs, but that wasn't why she was shaking. She was shaking because she understood, on some primal level, that what surrounded them was dangerous. Not dangerous like a bear or a blizzard. Dangerous like a secret that people had died to protect. "We should go back up," Sarah said, her voice tight. "Right now." But Maya had already moved deeper into the chamber, her small feet carrying her toward a stack of paintings leaning against the far wall. The flashlight's beam followed her, and Sarah's heart clenched with fear and something else. The same curiosity that lived in her daughter lived in her, too. The need to understand, the inability to walk away from mystery. Maya stopped in front of a painting that was nearly as tall as she was. The frame was carved wood covered in gold, leaf, ornate and heavy. The painting itself showed a winter landscape, snow-covered mountains and frozen lakes, rendered in oils so old the surface had developed a fine network of cracks. In the bottom right corner, Sarah could see a signature, though she couldn't read it in the dim light. "Mama, look at this one," Maya said, moving to the next painting. This one showed a young girl, maybe Maya's age, holding a small dog. The girl's face was so detailed, so lifelike, that for a moment Sarah thought it might be a photograph. But no, it was painted, every strand of hair individually rendered, every fold of the girl's blue dress carefully shaded. Sarah forced herself to move forward, to join her daughter. She knelt beside Maya and really looked at the painting. In the lower corner, there was a small brass plaque attached to the frame. She brushed dust away from it and read, "Portrait of Marie-Louise, 1823, artist unknown, 1823, over 200 years old." Sarah's stomach twisted. Paintings this old, this well-preserved, didn't just end up in underground chambers, beneath forgotten cabins. They belonged in museums, or in the private collections of people wealthy enough to have security systems and insurance policies. "We need to look at the crates," Sarah said, standing up. Her legs felt weak, but she forced them to move. The nearest crate had Russian writing stenciled on its side in faded white paint. Sarah didn't speak Russian, but she recognized the Cyrillic alphabet. She found a crowbar hanging on a hook driven into the stone wall, and used it to pry open the top of the crate. The wood was old but solid, and it took several minutes of work before the lid finally came free, with a screech of nails pulling from wood. Inside, packed in straw that had turned brittle with age, were more treasures. Small bronze sculptures, each wrapped in cloth. Sarah unwrapped one carefully. It was heavy, maybe 10 pounds, showing a horse rearing on its hind legs, every muscle perfectly rendered. The detail was extraordinary. She could see individual veins in the horse's neck, each strand of its mane. On the base of the sculpture was a stamp, a symbol she didn't recognize, and words in what might have been French or Italian. She set it down carefully and unwrapped another. This one showed a dancer, a woman in flowing robes, frozen in mid-movement. The bronze had a green patina that spoke of great age. Maya had moved to another crate and was trying to open it herself. "Mama, help me with this one." Sarah left the bronze sculptures and moved to help her daughter. Together, they pried open another crate. This one held books, leather-bound volumes with pages edged in gold. Sarah lifted one out carefully. The leather cover was embossed with elaborate designs, and when she opened it, the pages crackled softly. The text inside was handwritten in elegant script, each letter perfectly formed. The language looked like Latin or Old German. The third crate they opened held something that made Sarah's blood run cold. Documents. Thick folders full of papers, records, photographs. She pulled one folder out and opened it. Inside were typed pages in English, dated 1944, with an official-looking seal at the top. The header read, "Reich Ministry for the Occupied Eastern Territories, Asset Transfer Documentation." Sarah's hands began to shake, so badly she nearly dropped the folder. She had seen enough World War II documentaries to understand what she was looking at. These weren't just random treasures hidden away by some eccentric collector. This was looted art, stolen property taken during the war, over 80 years ago, and hidden here in the wilderness where no one would ever think to look for it. "Mama?" Maya asked, seeing the expression on her mother's face. "What's wrong?" Sarah couldn't answer. She flipped through more pages in the folder. Inventory lists, photographs of paintings and sculptures, records of where items had been taken from. Warsaw, Prague, Paris, Moscow. The list went on and on. A catalogue of cultural theft, on a massive scale. At the bottom of the folder was a map, hand-drawn, showing a location in Alaska, with coordinates written neatly beside it. This location, this exact spot. And at the top of the map, in English written in a careful hand, "Temporary cache, retrieval planned spring 1946. But no one had come in the spring of 1946. Or, if they had, They hadn't taken the treasures with them. Everything had stayed here, frozen and forgotten, for nearly 80 years. Sarah sat down hard on the cold stone floor, her mind reeling. She thought about the cabin above them, about the calendar frozen on March 1991. Someone had been here then, 45 years after the treasures were hidden. Someone had been maintaining the cabin, watching over this secret. But then they had left and never returned. "Mama, you're scaring me," Maya said, her voice small. Sarah looked up at her daughter and forced herself to take a deep breath. "I'm okay, baby. I'm just trying to understand what all this is." "Is it treasure?" Maya asked. "Like in the stories?" Sarah let out a laugh that sounded more like a sob. "Yes, baby, it's treasure. But it's treasure that belongs to someone else. Lots of someone else's." She stood up and walked slowly through the chamber, counting. 53 crates in total. If each one held items like the ones they had already opened, if each painting and sculpture and book was as valuable as they appeared to be, then they were standing in the middle of a fortune worth tens of millions of dollars, maybe more, and it was all stolen. Sarah's mind immediately went to the practical concerns that had dominated her life for 2 years. If they reported this, if they told someone what they had found, would they get a reward? Museums paid finder's fees for recovered stolen art, didn't they? Or would they just be accused of theft themselves? Would the authorities believe that 2 homeless people had simply stumbled upon this by accident? But more than the practical concerns was a deeper, more visceral fear. People had hidden this here for a reason. People had kept this secret for 80 years. And secrets this big, this valuable, were the kind of secrets that got people killed. "We need to close everything back up," Sarah said firmly. "Right now, we're going to seal these crates, go back upstairs, and pretend we never saw any of this." "But Mama..." "No," Sarah said, more sharply than she intended. "Maya, listen to me. This isn't ours. This is dangerous. We can't tell anyone about this. Do you understand?" Maya's eyes filled with tears at the harsh tone, and Sarah immediately felt guilty. She knelt down and pulled her daughter into a hug. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm not angry at you. I'm just scared. This is the kind of thing that can hurt people. We need to be very, very careful." Maya nodded against her shoulder, and Sarah held her for a long moment, trying to calm her own racing heart. Then they worked together to close the crates they had opened, to put everything back as close to how they had found it as possible. As they worked, Sarah's mind drifted back to how they had ended up here, homeless and desperate in the Alaskan wilderness. It felt like another lifetime, though it had only been 2 years. 2 years ago, Sarah had been happy. She had a job at Fairbanks Regional Hospital, working reception in the emergency department. It wasn't glamorous work, and the pay wasn't great, but it was steady. She had an apartment, a small 2-bedroom on the edge of town, with water stains on the ceiling and pipes that froze every winter, but it was theirs. Maya had her own room, decorated with posters of animals and a bookshelf full of library books. Maya's father, Derek, had been out of the picture since Maya was 3, currently serving a 15-year sentence for armed robbery at a convenience store that had gone horribly wrong. Sarah hadn't spoken to him in 5 years, and she didn't plan to ever speak to him again. Some mistakes couldn't be forgiven, but Sarah had been managing. Barely, but managing. She had a routine. She had a life. And then she had made the mistake of trusting someone. His name was Marcus, and he had seemed kind. He worked maintenance at the hospital, and they had started talking during her breaks. He made her laugh, something she hadn't done in years. After 6 months of friendship, he had asked if he could move in, just temporarily, while he looked for a new place. His landlord was selling the building, he said, and he needed a few weeks to find something affordable. Sarah had said yes. She was lonely, and Maya seemed to like him. He was good with kids, patient, and funny. For 3 months, it had actually been nice having someone else around. someone to split the bills with, someone to talk to after Maya went to bed. Then she had come home early from work one day, sent home because the hospital was slow. She had found Marcus and two of his friends in her living room, and on the coffee table between them was something that made Sarah's blood turn to ice. White powder in clear bags, money stacked in neat piles, and a gun, black and heavy, sitting on top of her daughter's homework folder. Sarah had screamed at them to get out. Marcus had tried to explain, tried to say it wasn't what it looked like, but Sarah had called 911 right there. The police had arrived within minutes. Marcus and his friends had been arrested. But then everything had fallen apart. The apartment was searched. Sarah wasn't arrested, but her landlord found out about the drugs and the gun, and he evicted her. 30 days to leave. Her supervisor at the hospital called her into the office and told her she was being let go. The hospital couldn't have employees associated with drug activity. It didn't matter that Sarah had reported it. It didn't matter that she hadn't known. Association was enough. Within a month, Sarah and Maya were homeless. Sarah's savings, never much to begin with, lasted 3 weeks. Then it was gone. Spent on a motel room that felt like safety, but was really just a countdown to nothing. She tried to find work, but every application asked if she had been fired from her last job. When she told the truth, no one would hire her. When she lied, they called her references and found out anyway. She applied for assistance, but the waiting lists were months long. She called shelters, and most were full. For 2 years, they had been surviving. Sometimes in shelters, when spaces opened up. Sometimes in her car until it broke down and she couldn't afford to fix it. Sometimes in parks during the summer. Sometimes under bridges when the winter got bad. Always moving, always afraid. Always one step away from losing Maya to the state. The state had already threatened to take her daughter twice. Social services had investigated after a school counselor reported that Maya had been wearing the same clothes for 2 weeks. Sarah had talked her way out of it, promised she was getting help, promised things would improve. But she knew it was only a matter of time before they came again. Before they decided Maya would be better off in foster care. That fear, the fear of losing Maya, was worse than hunger, worse than cold, worse than anything. And it lived in Sarah's chest every single day, a constant weight that made it hard to breathe. Now, standing in this frozen underground chamber, surrounded by stolen treasure, worth more money than Sarah could even imagine, that fear came roaring back, because this discovery changed everything. And Sarah had learned the hard way that change was rarely good for people like her. They finished closing the crates and headed back toward the tunnel entrance. Sarah took one last look at the chamber, her flashlight beam sweeping across decades of secrets, and then they climbed the stone steps back up to the cabin. The warmth from the fire felt shocking after the deep cold of the chamber below. Sarah closed the hatch carefully, making sure it settled properly into its frame. Then she and Maya dragged the dusty rug back over it, covering it completely. "Mama?" Maya asked, as they sat down near the fire. "Are we going to tell someone?" Sarah stared into the flames, watching them dance and flicker. "I don't know, baby. I need to think." They sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the afternoon sun was already beginning to fade. Alaska in winter meant darkness came early and stayed late. They had maybe 2 more hours of daylight. Then night would fall and last for 14 hours. Sarah's mind kept returning to the documents she had seen. The inventory lists, the photographs, the meticulous records of cultural theft. If this treasure was returned, if it was recovered and given back to the museums and families it had been stolen from, it would be a major historical event. It would make international news. Books would be written about it. And Sarah and Maya would be at the center of it all. Their faces would be everywhere. Their story would be told and retold. They would be heroes, probably, but they would also be targets. Because if this treasure had been hidden here for 80 years, if someone had been maintaining this cabin as recently as 1991, then someone out there knew about it. Someone had been protecting this secret. And when word got out that it had been discovered, that person or persons would come looking. What happens next will turn this frozen wilderness into a battlefield of greed and justice, reveal a secret that powerful people have protected for generations, and force a desperate mother to make the most important choice of her life. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Sarah stood up and walked to the small window. Through the frost-covered glass, she could see the endless expanse of white, stretching in every direction, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. They were miles from the nearest town, miles from help, completely isolated. If they reported this discovery, how long would it take for someone to reach them? Days, at least. Maybe a week. And what would they do for food? In the meantime, the shelves in the cabin held some canned goods, but many of the cans were rusted through, unsafe to eat. They had maybe 3 or 4 cans that looked intact. That wasn't enough. And what if they tried to leave? To walk back to Coldfoot and report what they had found? The storm had passed, but the snow was deep. Too deep for Maya to walk through easily. And Sarah had no idea which direction Coldfoot even was. When they had been walking in the storm, they had been completely disoriented. They could have walked in circles for all she knew. No, leaving was too dangerous. They needed to stay here, at least for a few more days, until they had a plan, until Sarah could figure out what to do. She returned to the fire and started going through the supplies more carefully. The canned goods first. She found 4 cans of beans that looked safe, 3 cans of soup, and 2 cans of peaches. The peaches were dated 1987, 38 years old, but sealed cans could last decades if stored properly. She decided they would try the peaches tonight. If they didn't get sick, they could assume the other cans were safe, too. In a trunk beneath one of the shelves, she found more treasures. Not art treasures, but survival treasures. Dried food sealed in glass jars. Rice, beans, flour, sugar, salt. The jars were dusty but intact, the seals unbroken. She found packages of dried meat, something that looked like jerky, vacuum-sealed in plastic. She found tea bags in a metal tin, coffee in another tin. "Maya," she called out, "come help me inventory what we have." They spent the next hour going through every container, every drawer, every shelf. By the time they finished, Sarah felt marginally better about their situation. If they were careful, if they rationed properly, they had enough food for maybe 3 weeks, maybe a month, if they were very careful. Water wasn't a problem. There was snow everywhere, and they could melt it. The stream Sarah had noticed about 100 yards from the cabin would be frozen now, but come spring it would provide fresh water. Spring. Sarah shook her head. She wasn't thinking about spring. She was thinking about the next few days, one day at a time. That was all she could handle. As darkness fell, Sarah opened one of the cans of soup and heated it over the fire in the old pot. She divided it carefully between 2 bowls, making sure Maya got the larger portion. They ate slowly, savoring every warm bite. After the soup, Sarah opened the can of peaches. They ate half, saving the rest for tomorrow. The sweetness of the fruit was almost overwhelming after weeks of bland shelter food and gas station snacks. Maya's eyes drooped as she finished the last of her peaches. The warmth, the food, and the exhaustion of the past 2 days were catching up with her. Sarah tucked her into the small bed in the corner, piling blankets on top of her until she looked like a small mountain. "Mama," Maya murmured, already half asleep. "Is this our home now?" Sarah's throat tightened. "For a little while, baby. Get some sleep." Within minutes, Maya was breathing deeply, lost in the kind of heavy sleep that only children could achieve. Sarah sat by the fire and stared into the flames, thinking about the question her daughter had asked. Home. They hadn't had a real home in 2 years. They had had places they stayed, places they slept, but not a home. Home meant permanence. It meant safety. It meant belonging somewhere. Could this cabin be their home? Could they actually stay here, in the middle of nowhere, living off stored supplies and whatever they could forage come summer? It was crazy to even consider. But what was the alternative? Going back to Coldfoot? Going back to the shelters and the fear and the constant moving? Sarah thought about the treasure beneath the floor. $275 million. She didn't know exactly how she had arrived at that number, but it felt right. 53 crates full of paintings and sculptures and books, and who knew what else. Treasures stolen from across Europe during the war, and hidden here in the Alaskan wilderness. If she reported it, if she told the authorities, what would happen? They would come with trucks and equipment. They would remove everything. They would document it all, photograph it, catalog it. The items would be returned to their rightful owners or their heirs. Museums would reclaim lost masterpieces. Families would recover heirlooms they thought were gone forever. And Sarah and Maya would get what? A thank you? Maybe a small finder's fee? $1,000? $10,000? Even if they were generous, even if they gave her $50,000, it wouldn't be enough. That money would disappear within months, spent on rent and food and all the things they had gone without for 2 years. But if she didn't report it, if she kept it secret, what then? Could she sell one painting, just one small one? She could take it to Anchorage or Seattle, find a private buyer who wouldn't ask too many questions. She could get enough money to start over properly, get an apartment, get a car, get a job, give Maya a real life again. The thought made her sick to her stomach, because that was theft. That was taking something that didn't belong to her and profiting from it. That was the same thing the Nazis had done 80 years ago. How could she even consider it? But then she thought about Maya sleeping in the corner, her face peaceful for the first time in months. She thought about her daughter's shoes that were 2 sizes too small and held together with tape. She thought about the way Maya had stopped asking for things, stopped hoping for birthdays and Christmas and all the normal things children were supposed to have. Sarah put her head in her hands and tried not to cry. She was so tired, so desperately tired of being strong, of making impossible choices, of carrying the weight of survival on her shoulders every single day. She didn't know what to do, and not knowing felt like drowning. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the temperature was dropping again. Sarah could hear the wind picking up, not the roar of a storm, but the constant low moan of Arctic winter. She added more wood to the fire and pulled her blankets tighter around her shoulders. Tomorrow, she decided. She would figure it out tomorrow. Tonight, she just needed to rest. Tonight, they were warm and safe and fed. That was enough. That had to be enough. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the underground chamber. She saw the paintings and sculptures. She saw the documents with their careful lists of stolen property. She saw the map with its coordinates marking this exact location. And she wondered who else knew about those coordinates. Who else might have a copy of that map? Who else might be coming to check on a secret that had been kept for 80 years? Sarah stood up and walked to the door. She checked the lock, though it was just a simple wooden bar that slid across. Not much security, but better than nothing. She checked the window, making sure the shutters were closed tight. She checked on Maya, making sure her daughter was still breathing steadily, still safe. Then she sat down with her back against the door and decided she would keep watch, just for tonight. Tomorrow, she would make a decision about what to do with their discovery. Tomorrow she would figure out how to keep Maya safe while dealing with the dangerous secret they had stumbled into. But tonight, she would keep watch. Because a homeless mother and her daughter had found something that powerful people had killed to protect. And Sarah understood, with chilling certainty, that their lives were no longer simple. They were no longer just about survival. They were about something much bigger, something much more dangerous. And there was no going back. Sarah woke with a start, her neck stiff from sleeping against the door. Grey morning light filtered through the frost-covered window, weak and pale. The fire had burned down to embers during the night, and the cabin had grown cold again. She could see her breath in the air. Maya was still asleep, buried under the pile of blankets. Sarah stood slowly, her joints aching, and moved to rebuild the fire. As she added wood and coaxed the flames back to life, her mind returned to the problem that had kept her awake most of the night. The treasure beneath the floor. What to do about it? She needed information. She needed to understand what they had really found down there, who had hidden it, why it had never been recovered, and, most importantly, whether anyone was still looking for it. The cabin had no electricity, no internet, no phone. They were completely cut off from the world. But as Sarah looked around in the growing firelight, she noticed something she had missed before. Books. An entire shelf of them near the bed. She walked over and ran her fingers along the spines. Most were in languages she couldn't read: Russian, German, French, but there were a few in English. She pulled one down, a thick volume bound in cracked leather. The title was embossed in gold: The Spoils of War, Looted Art in the 20th Century. Sarah's heart began to pound. She opened the book carefully. Inside the front cover, someone had written in faded ink, "Property of Dr. Victor Alderman, University of Alaska Fairbanks, 1989. 1989. 6 years before the calendar in the cabin had stopped at March 1991. Sarah sat down at the small table and began to read by the light of the fire. The book was dense, academic, but she forced herself to focus. It detailed the systematic looting of art and cultural treasures by Nazi forces during World War II. Entire museums emptied, private collections seized from Jewish families, national treasures stolen from occupied countries. Many of these items had been recovered after the war, but many more had disappeared completely. Some were believed destroyed, others hidden. The book estimated that art worth billions of dollars was still missing, scattered around the world, hidden in places no one would ever think to look, like an underground chamber beneath a cabin in Alaska. Sarah found a section about the so-called rat lines, the escape routes used by Nazi officials to flee Europe after the war. Some went to South America, others to the Middle East, and some, the book suggested, came to North America, to Canada, to the United States, places where they could disappear into immigrant communities and start new lives. She turned the page and found a handwritten note tucked between the pages. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but still readable. Follow the Alderman lead. The Alaska cache is real. Coordinates confirmed. Will investigate spring 91. Tell no one. They are still watching. The note wasn't signed, but Sarah felt ice run down her spine. Someone had known about the treasure. Someone had been planning to investigate. In the spring of 1991. But the calendar in the cabin had stopped at March of that year, and whoever had written this note had never removed the treasure. What had happened to them? Sarah pulled down another book, this one titled Lost and Found: The Hunt for Nazi Plunder. She flipped through it until she found a chapter about Alaska. Her breath caught as she read. In 1945, as the war ended, a German U-boat had been spotted off the coast of Alaska. The submarine had surrendered to American forces, but several crew members had escaped inland. They were never found, despite extensive searches. The book speculated that these escaped crew members might have been transporting valuables, using the remote Alaskan wilderness as a hiding place until they could safely retrieve them. But there was no proof, no evidence, just rumors and speculation. Until now. Sarah closed the book and looked around the cabin with new eyes. This place hadn't been built by a trapper or a miner. It had been built by someone with purpose. Someone who needed a permanent structure to guard a secret. And that someone was probably one of those escaped German sailors, hiding in plain sight in the Alaskan wilderness, maintaining the cache until it could be safely moved. But it never had been moved, which meant something had gone wrong. Maybe the person had died, maybe they had been caught, or maybe they had simply grown old and been unable to complete their mission. And then someone else had found the cabin. Dr. Victor Alderman. Whoever he was. In 1989, he had acquired property documents, found the books, left his notes. He had been planning to investigate in the spring of 1991, but he had never made it. The calendar stopped at March. The cabin had remained untouched for 34 more years. What had happened to Dr. Alderman? Sarah pulled down more books, searching for answers. She found a journal tucked between 2 volumes, its leather cover stiff with age. She opened it carefully. The first entry was dated January 5, 1990. Arrived at the cabin today after 3 days of difficult travel. The weather is brutal, but the location is perfect. Remote, isolated. No one knows I'm here except Margaret, and she has agreed to keep my secret. If my research is correct, what lies beneath this cabin could rewrite history. The Vogel cache. Real. Documented. Worth an estimated 200 million or more. I must proceed carefully. There are others who know about this. Others who would kill to keep it hidden. Sarah's hands shook as she turned the pages. Entry after entry detailed Dr. Alderman's research. He had traced ownership of the cabin back to a man named Klaus Vogel, who had homesteaded the land in 1947 under the GI Bill, claiming to be a displaced person from Austria. But Alderman had found evidence that Vogel was actually Klaus Vogel Schmidt, a former SS officer who had been declared dead in 1945. Vogel had lived at the cabin alone for nearly 40 years, maintaining the cache, waiting for orders that never came. He had died in 1986, alone and forgotten. The cabin had been abandoned, the land reverting to state ownership. No one had known about the treasure because Vogel had never told anyone. But somehow, Alderman had figured it out. Through research, through academic detective work, and he had come here to claim it. Sarah flipped to the last entry in the journal. March 9, 1991. They found me. I don't know how, but they did. 2 men arrived this morning, claiming to be state officials checking on abandoned properties. But I recognized one of them from my research. Wilhelm Brandt, Vogel's nephew. He's been living in Anchorage under the name William Brand. He knows I know. He told me to leave and forget everything I've seen. He said if I told anyone, if I published anything, I would disappear. I believe him. I'm leaving tomorrow at first light. I'm taking copies of the documents with me, hidden them in my truck. If something happens to me, Margaret knows where to look. The cache must be exposed. The families deserve to get their stolen property back. But I fear. The entry ended abruptly. No signature, no conclusion, just blank pages after that. Sarah felt sick. Dr. Alderman had left the cabin 34 years ago, and apparently never made it back to civilization. He had disappeared. And if this Wilhelm Brandt or William Brand was still alive, he would be in his 80s now, still protecting a secret, still willing to kill for it. Maya stirred. In the bed, stretching and yawning, Sarah quickly closed the journal and shoved it back between the books. She didn't want Maya to see it, didn't want her daughter to know how much danger they might be in. "Morning, Mama," Maya said sleepily. "Morning, baby. How'd you sleep?" "Good. I'm hungry." Sarah smiled, trying to push down the fear that was clawing at her throat. "Let's make some breakfast. I found rice and dried beans. I can cook us something warm." As Sarah prepared their meal, her mind raced. They needed to leave. Today. Now. They needed to get to Coldfoot or Fairbanks or anywhere with people and phones and police. They needed to report what they had found, and then disappear before William Brand or anyone else came looking. But even as she thought it, she knew it was impossible. The snow was too deep. Maya couldn't walk that far, and Sarah had no idea which direction to go. They were trapped here, at least for a few more days, until either the snow melted enough to travel or until someone came looking for them. She prayed it would be the former and not the latter. They ate their breakfast in silence. Sarah's portion of rice and beans, flavored with a little salt and some dried herbs she found in a jar. It wasn't much, but it was warm and filling. After they ate, Sarah cleaned the dishes with melted snow water and tried to figure out what to do next. "Can we explore more?" Maya asked. "Maybe there's other stuff in the cabin we haven't found yet." Sarah hesitated. Part of her wanted to keep Maya away from anything connected to the treasure, but another part of her, the practical part, knew that understanding everything about this cabin might be the key to their survival. "Okay," she said, "but stay away from the hatch. We're not going down there again." They spent the morning searching every corner of the cabin. In a trunk under the bed, Sarah found old clothes that looked military in origin, wool uniforms in field gray, boots, a helmet with a distinctive shape that she recognized from movies, German, World War II era. There was also a metal box containing papers, letters written in German, photographs of young men in uniform, and one photograph that made Sarah's blood run cold. It showed a much younger Klaus Vogel standing in front of this very cabin. But he wasn't alone. Next to him stood a young boy, maybe 10 years old, with blonde hair and a serious expression. On the back of the photo, someone had written in English, "Klaus and Wilhelm, 1953. Wilhelm, Vogel's nephew. The same Wilhelm who had confronted Dr. Alderman in 1991. The same person who might still be out there, still protecting this secret." Sarah looked at the photograph more closely. The boy would be in his 80s now if he was still alive. An old man, but still dangerous, still protecting what his uncle had hidden. She was about to put the photograph away when she heard something that made her freeze. An engine, distant, but getting closer. The unmistakable sound of a snowmobile cutting through the wilderness. Sarah ran to the window and peered out through the frost. At first, she saw nothing but endless white. Then, maybe half a mile away, she spotted it, a black shape moving across the snow, heading directly toward the cabin. "Maya," Sarah said, her voice urgent but controlled. "Come here, right now." Maya heard the tone and obeyed immediately, scrambling across the cabin to her mother's side. "Someone's coming," Sarah said. "I need you to hide. Right now. Under the bed. Get all the way back against the wall, and don't make a sound. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe. Do you understand?" Maya's eyes went wide with fear, but she nodded. She scrambled under the bed, and Sarah pushed the trunk in after her, partially blocking her from view. Then Sarah stood and tried to calm her racing heart. The sound of the snowmobile grew louder, closer. It stopped somewhere outside, the engine cutting off abruptly. Sarah heard footsteps crunching in the snow. Heavy boots, confident steps. Someone who knew exactly where they were going. A knock on the door. 3 sharp raps. Sarah didn't move, didn't breathe. Maybe if she stayed quiet, they would leave. Maybe they would think the cabin was empty. "I know someone's in there," a man's voice called out. Old, but strong, accented. "I saw the smoke from your fire. Please open the door. I'm not here to hurt you." Sarah still didn't move. The man sighed, audible even through the thick wooden door. "Very well. I'm coming in. I apologize for the intrusion." The door swung open, and an old man stepped inside. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with a frame that had once been powerful, but was now bent with age. His hair was white, his face deeply lined. He wore an expensive-looking parka and insulated pants. On his hip, visible beneath his coat, was a holster with a gun. He closed the door behind him and looked at Sarah with eyes that were sharp despite his age. Eyes that assessed everything in a single glance. The fire, the dishes drying by the hearth, the blankets on the bed. He was looking for something, or someone. "Where is the child?" he asked calmly. Sarah's heart stopped. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Please, I can see her footprints in the dust. Small ones. A child's. Where is she?" Sarah moved to put herself between the man and the bed. "Who are you? What do you want?" "My name is William Brand," the man said. "Though I was born Wilhelm Brandt, and I believe you know what I want. You found it, didn't you? The cash beneath the floor." Sarah said nothing, but her silence was answer enough. William nodded slowly. "Of course you did. You're homeless, desperate, seeking shelter from the storm. You found the cabin, you found the hatch, and now, you know." "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah said, but her voice shook. "Don't lie to me," William said, his voice hardening. "I've been protecting this secret for 70 years, since I was a boy, since my uncle brought me here and showed me what he was guarding. I've killed to keep it secret. I'll kill again if I have to." Sarah felt her legs go weak. This was it. This was how she and Maya would die, frozen and forgotten in an Alaskan wilderness, killed by an old man protecting Nazi treasure. "Please," she whispered. "We won't tell anyone. We'll leave. We'll forget we ever saw anything. Just let us go." William studied her for a long moment. Then he walked to the window and looked out at the endless snow. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, tired. "Do you know what it's like to carry a secret for 70 years? To know that what you're protecting was stolen from people who were murdered? To understand that you're guarding the spoils of genocide?" He turned to look at her. "I was 10 years old when my uncle first brought me here. He told me it was treasure. He told me we were protecting it for the fatherland. I didn't understand what that meant. I was just a child." He sat down heavily in one of the chairs at the table. Sarah noticed for the first time how old he really looked, how exhausted. "I'm 82 years old," William continued. "I've spent my entire life protecting something I've come to hate, but I can't stop. Don't you see? If this comes out, if the world learns what's here, my uncle's name will be remembered as a thief and a murderer. My family's name will be destroyed. Everything we've built will be gone. Those treasures belong to the families they were stolen from," Sarah said quietly. "People who were killed. People who lost everything. Don't they deserve to get their property back?" William looked at her with eyes full of pain. "Of course they do. But what about my family? My children? My grandchildren? They're innocent. They don't know anything about this. If the truth comes out, they'll be destroyed by association, branded as descendants of Nazis, shunned, hated. What happens next will force Sarah to choose between survival and justice, reveal the true cost of keeping secrets, and prove that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to look away. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Sarah took a shaky breath. "So what now? You're going to kill us? A woman and a 9-year-old girl? To protect your family name?" William was quiet for a long moment. Then he shook his head slowly. No, I'm not. I'm tired. I'm so tired of this burden. When I heard someone had been spotted near the cabin, when I saw the smoke, I came here, ready to do whatever was necessary. But I'm done." He reached into his pocket, and Sarah tensed, but he only pulled out a folded piece of paper. He placed it on the table. "These are the names," he said. "The families, the museums, everyone who had property stolen by my uncle and hidden here. I've kept these lists for decades, too afraid to do anything with them. Too much of a coward to make things right." He stood up slowly, like every joint hurt. "I'm going to leave now. I'm going to go home to Anchorage. I'm going to tell my wife everything. And then I'm going to turn myself in to the authorities. I'll tell them about the cash, about my uncle, about Dr. Alderman. Sarah stared at him in shock. Dr. Alderman. What happened to him? William's face crumpled. I didn't kill him. I swear I didn't. I threatened him, told him to leave, and never come back. He left the next morning in his truck, but there was a storm. He went off the road somewhere between here and Coldfoot. They found his truck 2 months later, empty. His body was never recovered. I don't know if he got out and froze to death, or if something else happened, but his death is on me. I drove him out into that storm. Why are you telling me this? Sarah asked. Because you have a child, William said simply. Because I can see in your eyes the same thing I saw in my uncle's eyes before he died. The burden of protecting something you know is wrong. The weight of secrets that destroy you slowly from the inside. He moved toward the door. Don't make my mistake. Don't spend your life protecting something that should be brought into the light. Call the authorities. Tell them what's here. Get your daughter somewhere safe and tell them everything. He opened the door and cold air rushed in. He paused and looked back at Sarah one last time. There's a radio, he said, in the shed behind the cabin. Solar powered. It still works. Use it. And when they ask you how you found this place, tell them an old man's conscience finally broke. Then he was gone. Sarah heard the snowmobile engine roar to life. She ran to the window and watched as William Brand drove away across the snow, growing smaller and smaller until he disappeared into the white landscape. Sarah's legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the floor. Her whole body was shaking. Mama? Maya's voice came from under the bed, small and scared. It's okay, baby, Sarah said, her voice cracking. You can come out now. He's gone. Maya crawled out and ran to her mother, throwing her arms around her neck. Sarah held her tight and let the tears come. They sat like that for a long time, holding each other, both of them shaking. Finally, Sarah pulled back and looked at her daughter. Are you okay? Maya nodded. Who was that man? Someone who made bad choices a long time ago, Sarah said. Someone who's finally trying to make things right. She stood up and walked to the table where William had left the paper. She unfolded it and found not just names, but detailed lists. Items stolen from each family or museum. Descriptions, dates, everything documented with painful precision. At the bottom of the list, William had written in shaky handwriting, I'm sorry. I should have done this 70 years ago. Please forgive me. Sarah folded the paper carefully and put it in her pocket. Then she looked at Maya. There's a radio in a shed outside. We're going to find it. We're going to call for help. And we're going to tell them everything. Okay? Maya nodded. Are we going to be in trouble? Sarah thought about that. They might be. The authorities might not believe they had just stumbled onto this by accident. They might be investigated, questioned, suspected. But staying silent wasn't an option anymore. Not after what William had told her. Not after seeing the list of families who deserved to get their property back. I don't know, baby, Sarah said honestly. But we're going to do the right thing anyway. Because that's what good people do. They bundled up in every piece of warm clothing they could find and went outside. The shed was small, half buried in snow, but the door opened easily. Inside, mounted on the wall, was an old ham radio unit. Just as William had said, it was connected to a solar panel on the roof. The battery indicator showed it was charged. Sarah had never used a ham radio before, but the controls were straightforward. She turned it on and was rewarded with static. She found the frequency for emergency services and pressed the transmit button. Hello, this is Sarah Thompson. My daughter and I are stranded at an abandoned cabin approximately. She paused, realizing she had no idea of the coordinates. Then she remembered the map she had seen in the underground chamber. She described the location as best she could. We need assistance. We've also discovered something important. Stolen property. historical artifacts. We need law enforcement and possibly federal agents. Please respond. Nothing but static. She tried again and again. On the fourth try, a voice crackled through. This is Alaska State Troopers dispatch. We copy your message. Can you repeat your location? Sarah's hands shook with relief as she gave all the information she had. The dispatcher told her to stay put, that help was coming, but it might take a day or two, depending on weather. They would send a helicopter as soon as conditions allowed. Sarah thanked them and turned off the radio to conserve the battery. She and Maya went back inside the cabin. Sarah built up the fire and made them both tea with the old tea bags she had found. They sat together near the warmth, wrapped in blankets, and waited. "Mama?" Maya asked. "What's going to happen to us?" Sarah pulled her daughter close. "I don't know exactly, but we're going to tell the truth. We're going to help get all those stolen things back to their families. And then we're going to figure out how to build a real life again. Together. Will we have a home?" Sarah's heart broke at the question. "Yes, baby. Somehow, we will. I promise." She didn't know how she would keep that promise, but she knew that doing the right thing, telling the truth about what they had found, was the only path forward. Whatever came next, whatever consequences they faced, they would face them together. And maybe, just maybe, the world would be a little bit kinder to a homeless mother and daughter who had helped solve one of the greatest art theft mysteries of the 20th century. They just had to survive long enough to find out. The helicopter arrived 36 hours later, its blades churning the snow into blinding white clouds as it descended into the clearing near the cabin. Sarah held Maya close, both of them squinting against the wind and ice crystals that pelted their faces. 2 Alaska State Troopers emerged from the aircraft, followed by a woman in a federal jacket marked FBI. The lead trooper, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and a weathered face, approached them carefully. "Sarah Thompson?" Sarah nodded, her arm tight around Maya's shoulders. "I'm Sergeant Davis. This is Agent Rachel Morrison from the FBI Art Crime Team. We need you to tell us everything." They went inside the cabin, and Sarah told them the whole story. How they had been caught in the storm, how they had found the cabin, how Maya had discovered the hatch, how they had explored the chamber below and found the treasure. She showed them Dr. Alderman's journal, the photographs, the lists that William Brand had left. She told them about William's visit, his confession, his departure. Agent Morrison listened intently, taking notes, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When Sarah finished, the agent looked at her with something that might have been respect. "Do you understand what you found?" Morrison asked quietly. "This is one of the largest recoveries of Nazi-looted art in history. We've been looking for the Vogel cache for over 50 years. Most experts thought it was a myth. It's real," Sarah said. "It's all down there." The troopers and the FBI agent spent the next 6 hours documenting everything. They photographed the cabin, the underground chamber, every single crate and painting and sculpture. They carefully catalogued the items that were already unpacked. They took Sarah and Maya's statements multiple times, recording every detail. As evening fell, Sergeant Davis approached Sarah with a thermos of hot soup and sandwiches that had been brought on the helicopter. "You and your daughter need to eat. It's going to be a long night." "What happens now?" Sarah asked, accepting the food gratefully. "Now we secure the site," Davis said. "Agent Morrison is calling in a full recovery team. They'll be here by tomorrow morning with the equipment needed to safely remove everything. You and Maya will be flown to Fairbanks tonight. You'll need to give more detailed statements. There will be questions. Lots of them." "Are we in trouble?" Sarah asked, the fear she'd been holding back finally surfacing. Davis shook his head. "No. You're witnesses, potentially heroes, depending on how this all shakes out. You did the right thing by calling us immediately." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I thought about not calling. I thought about taking just one painting and selling it, getting enough money to start over. Davis put a hand on her shoulder. But you didn't. That's what matters. You did the hard thing. The right thing. By the time they loaded onto the helicopter, it was fully dark. Maya fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by the stress and excitement. Sarah held her daughter close and looked out the window as they lifted off. Below them, the cabin grew smaller and smaller, lit by portable lights the recovery team had set up. That little structure that had saved their lives, that had held such dangerous secrets, was about to make history. They landed in Fairbanks 3 hours later. Instead of being taken to a police station, they were brought to a hotel. A nice one. Nicer than any place Sarah had stayed in years. Agent Morrison explained that the FBI was covering their expenses while they sorted everything out. "You'll have your own room," Morrison said, handing Sarah a key card. "There's food in the mini-fridge. Tomorrow morning, we'll need you both to come to our field office for formal interviews. But tonight, get some rest. You've earned it." Sarah and Maya entered the hotel room, and Maya's eyes went wide. There were 2 beds with clean white sheets, a television, a bathroom with actual hot water and towels that looked soft and new, heat that came from vents instead of a fire. It was almost overwhelming. Maya ran to one of the beds and jumped on it, laughing. "Mama, it's so soft." Sarah couldn't help but smile, even as tears rolled down her cheeks. It had been so long since she'd heard her daughter laugh like that, carefree, full of joy, like a child should sound. That night, after they had both showered and eaten and changed into clean clothes that Agent Morrison had arranged to be delivered, Sarah tucked Maya into bed and climbed into her own. The sheets felt like silk against her skin. The mattress didn't have springs poking through. The room was warm and safe and quiet. For the first time in 2 years, Sarah slept through the entire night without waking once in fear. The next morning brought a whirlwind. Sarah and Maya were interviewed separately and together. They answered the same questions multiple times. They looked at photographs of items from the cache and confirmed what they had seen. They signed statements and declarations. The process was exhausting but necessary. By afternoon, Agent Morrison sat down with them in a conference room. "I want you to understand what's going to happen next. This discovery is going to be international news. Your names will be public. There will be media attention. It might be overwhelming." Sarah felt her stomach clench. "Can't we stay anonymous?" Morrison shook her head. "Not realistically. Too many people are involved already. The recovery team, the state troopers, the local authorities. Someone will talk to the press, and once that happens, the story will explode. But the FBI will provide security for you. We'll make sure you're safe." "What about William Brand?" Sarah asked. "He turned himself in this morning at the Anchorage field office," Morrison said. "He's being charged as an accessory after the fact in the concealment of stolen property. Given his age and his cooperation, he'll likely serve minimal time. But his testimony is going to be crucial in prosecuting any remaining conspirators and in returning the items to their rightful owners." Over the next week, Sarah and Maya stayed in Fairbanks under FBI protection. While the recovery operation continued, the media attention started small. A local news story about a significant art recovery. But within days, it became national news. Then, international. Homeless mother and daughter discover $275 million Nazi treasure trove. The headlines read, "Greatest art recovery in 50 years. Found by 9-year-old girl." Reporters camped outside the FBI field office. News vans lined the streets. Sarah's phone, which Agent Morrison had helped her reactivate, rang constantly with interview requests. She declined most of them, overwhelmed by the attention. But then something unexpected happened. The families whose property had been stolen began reaching out, not through reporters or lawyers, but directly. Letters started arriving at the FBI office, addressed to Sarah and Maya Thompson. The first one Sarah opened was from a woman in Poland named Anna Kowalski. written in careful English. Dear Sarah and Maya, you have given my family something we thought was lost forever. The painting you found, the portrait of a young girl with a dog, was painted by my great-great-grandfather. It hung in our family home in Warsaw until 1943, when it was taken by German soldiers. My grandmother spoke of it until the day she died, saying it was the only image she had of her little sister, who was killed during the war. Because of you, I will finally see my great-aunt's face. Thank you is not enough. You have given us back a piece of our history, a piece of our hearts. Sarah read the letter to Maya that night in their hotel room, both of them crying. It made everything real. These weren't just paintings and sculptures. They were memories. They were connections to people who had been murdered. They were evidence that those people had existed, had loved, had created beauty. More letters came, from museums in France and Holland, from a Jewish family in New York, whose great-grandfather had been a renowned art collector before the Holocaust, from the Polish government thanking them for helping recover national treasures. Each letter was a reminder that they had done the right thing, no matter how scary it had been. 3 weeks after the discovery, Agent Morrison called Sarah into a meeting. With her was a man, in an expensive suit, who introduced himself as David Chen, an attorney representing several of the families whose property had been recovered. Miss Thompson, he began, the families I represent want you to know how grateful they are for what you've done. Several of them have authorized me to offer you a substantial reward. Sarah's heart began to pound. How much? $3 million, Chen said, split between monetary payments from the families and finder's fees from the museums. Additionally, the state of Alaska has agreed to provide you with permanent housing assistance and job placement services. Sarah couldn't breathe. $3 million. It was more money than she had ever imagined having. It was enough to buy a house, to send Maya to college, to never worry about being homeless again. There's one condition, Chen continued. Several families and institutions have requested that you consider establishing a foundation in Maya's name, a fund dedicated to helping homeless families, particularly those with children. They'd like to contribute additional money to seed the foundation. They believe your story could inspire others and provide real help to people in situations like you were in. Sarah looked at Maya, who was sitting quietly beside her, taking everything in with wide eyes. What do you think, baby? Should we help other families like us? Maya nodded solemnly. So other kids don't have to be cold and scared like we were. Sarah turned back to Chen, tears streaming down her face. Yes, absolutely yes. The next month was a blur of activity. Sarah and Maya were moved into a comfortable apartment in Fairbanks, fully furnished and paid for by the State Assistance Program. Sarah was offered a job at the Alaska Museum of the North, helping coordinate the return of recovered items to their rightful owners. The work was meaningful and paid well enough that Sarah could finally breathe without worrying about money. The Maya Thompson Foundation was established with an initial endowment of $2 million from the families and museums, plus $1 million from Sarah's reward money. The foundation's mission was simple: to provide emergency housing, job training, and support services to homeless families in Alaska. But the real transformation wasn't in the bank accounts, or the job offers, or the media attention. It was in Maya. Sarah watched her daughter slowly come back to life over those months. Maya, who had stopped smiling, started laughing again. Maya, who had learned to make herself invisible in shelters, started raising her hand in her new school. Maya, who had stopped asking for things because she knew there was no money, started dreaming again about the future. 6 months after finding the treasure, Maya's teacher called Sarah in for a conference. Sarah went nervously, worried that something was wrong. But the teacher, a kind woman named Mrs. Patterson, was smiling. "I wanted to show you something, Mrs. Patterson said, sliding a piece of paper across her desk. It was an essay Maya had written, titled, "What Home Means to Me." Sarah read through tears. Maya had written about the cabin, about being scared and cold, about finding the treasure. But mostly, she had written about her mother, about how Sarah had never given up, about how Sarah had always kept her safe, even when they had nothing, about how Sarah had chosen to do the right thing even when it was hard. The essay ended with words that broke Sarah's heart and healed it at the same time. Home isn't a place. Home is my mom. She's been my home for 2 whole years, even when we didn't have a house. And now we have both. But if I had to choose, I'd always choose her. She's an exceptional child, Mrs. Patterson said softly. She's been through more than most adults, but she's kind and compassionate and brilliant. You should be very proud. I am, Sarah whispered. Every single day. A year after the discovery, Sarah and Maya attended a ceremony at the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. Several of the recovered paintings were being displayed in a special exhibit called Reclaimed: The Vogel Cache and the Triumph of Justice. The exhibit told the story of the theft, the decades of hiding, and the discovery that had brought everything to light. But what moved Sarah most was the wall dedicated to the victims, photographs of the families who had owned these treasures, names of people who had been killed during the Holocaust, stories of lives interrupted, of beauty stolen, of memory nearly erased. And at the end of that wall was a simple plaque that read, "Recovered and returned thanks to the courage of Sarah and Maya Thompson, who chose to tell the truth when they could have chosen silence." At the reception after the opening, Sarah was approached by an elderly woman with white hair and eyes that sparkled with intelligence. "Miss Thompson, I'm Anna Kowalski. I wrote to you." Sarah recognized the name immediately, the woman whose great-aunt's portrait they had found. "Mrs. Kowalski, I'm so honored to meet you." Anna took Sarah's hands in her own. "No, my dear, I am honored to meet you. Do you know what you gave me? Not just a painting. You gave me proof that my family existed, that we mattered, that we weren't just numbers in a history book. That's a gift beyond price." They stood together in front of the portrait of the young girl with the dog, and Anna told Sarah stories about her great-aunt, about how she loved animals, about how she had wanted to be a veterinarian, about how she had been only 12 when she died. "She would have been 98 this year," Anna said softly. "She never got to grow up, never got to have children or grandchildren, never got to become the person she was meant to be. But because of you, her face will be remembered, her story will be told. That's everything." Maya, who had been standing quietly beside Sarah, reached out and took Anna's hand. "I'm sorry she didn't get to grow up." Anna smiled through her tears. "So am I, sweet child. But I'm grateful that you did. You're going to do wonderful things with your life. I can feel it." 2 years after the discovery, the Maya Thompson Foundation had helped over 300 families in Alaska. They provided emergency shelter, job training, counseling services, and support for children. Sarah worked with the foundation part-time, while continuing her job at the museum. Maya, now 11, volunteered with the foundation's youth programs, helping other kids who were going through what she had experienced. The foundation purchased the old cabin where they had found the treasure. Instead of tearing it down, they preserved it as a historical site and a reminder that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, that sometimes the things we're running from lead us to exactly where we need to be. One evening, Sarah and Maya drove out to the cabin for a foundation event. They stood together in the doorway, looking at the space that had saved their lives. "Do you remember being scared?" Sarah asked Maya. "I remember being cold," Maya said, "and I remember feeling safe once we got inside, even though we didn't know what we'd find." "Are you glad we found the treasure?" Sarah asked. Maya was quiet for a moment, thinking, "I'm glad we helped those families get their stuff back. I'm glad we can help other families now. But Mama, the best thing we found wasn't the treasure. It was each other. We were always together, even when everything was hard. That mattered more than anything else. Sarah pulled her daughter close and kissed the top of her head. Maya was right. They had always had each other. The treasure had changed their circumstances, but it hadn't changed what mattered most: their bond, their love, their determination to survive together. 5 years after the discovery, Maya was 14 and thriving. She was an honor student, captain of her school's debate team, and a passionate advocate for homeless youth. She spoke at fundraisers for the foundation, telling her story to inspire others. She wasn't ashamed of where she had come from. She wore her past like armor, proof that circumstances don't define you. Sarah had been promoted to director of repatriation at the museum, overseeing the return of recovered items from not just the Vogel cache, but other collections as well. She had become an expert in her field, respected and valued. She owned a home now, a modest 3-bedroom house with a porch where she and Maya would sit on summer evenings and watch the midnight sun. But more than the job or the house or the financial security, what Sarah treasured most was the peace she finally felt. For 2 years, she had carried crushing guilt about failing as a mother, about not being able to provide for Maya. She had felt like she was drowning, like she would never surface again. But she had learned something important through it all. She had learned that strength wasn't about never falling. It was about getting back up. It was about making hard choices when everything seemed impossible. It was about protecting what mattered most, even when the cost was high. The final recovery from the Vogel cache took 3 years to complete. Every item was catalogued, authenticated, and researched. Ownership was traced, rightful heirs were located, and repatriation began. In total, the cache contained 417 items, worth an estimated $275 million. Paintings by masters whose works had been thought destroyed, sculptures from ancient Greece and Rome, books and manuscripts of incalculable historical value, religious artifacts taken from synagogues and churches across Europe. Each item had a story. Each return was a victory, and Sarah and Maya were there for many of them, watching as families were reunited with pieces of their history, as museums recovered treasures they thought were lost forever, as nations reclaimed their cultural heritage. But the story that stayed with Sarah the most was William Brand's. The old man, who had spent 70 years protecting a secret he had come to hate, finally found peace in telling the truth. He served 18 months in a minimum security facility and spent the rest of his time speaking to schools and organizations about the importance of moral courage. He and Sarah maintained a correspondence, 2 people who had been broken by secrets and healed by honesty. In one letter, William wrote, "You gave me something I thought was impossible. You gave me redemption. When I saw you in that cabin, protecting your daughter, willing to do anything to keep her safe, I saw myself as I should have been, as I failed to be. You chose courage when I chose cowardice. Thank you for showing me it's never too late to do the right thing." On the 10th anniversary of the discovery, the foundation held a celebration. Families they had helped came from all over Alaska, social workers who partnered with them, donors who believed in the mission, and Anna Kowalski, now 94 but still sharp as ever, who had become like a grandmother to Maya. Sarah stood at the podium and looked out at the crowd. She saw Maya sitting in the front row, no longer the scared 9-year-old who had huddled against her in a blizzard, but a confident young woman who knew her worth, who knew that her past didn't define her future, who understood that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the best versions of ourselves. 10 years ago, Sarah began, her voice steady, my daughter and I were homeless. We were cold and scared and desperate. We had lost everything, and I didn't know how we would survive. Then we found a cabin in a storm. We found shelter. We found warmth. And we found something that changed our lives forever. But it wasn't the treasure that saved us. It was the choice to do the right thing with what we found. It was the decision to tell the truth even when we were terrified. It was the realization that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help. She paused, looking directly at Maya. My daughter taught me that. She taught me that home isn't a place. It's the people who love you. It's the courage to keep going when everything seems impossible. It's the willingness to believe that tomorrow can be better than today. The room erupted in applause. Maya stood, tears streaming down her face, and ran to her mother. They embraced as cameras flashed and people cheered. Two survivors, two fighters, two people who had learned that the coldest winter eventually gives way to spring. That night, after everyone had gone home, Sarah and Maya sat on their porch watching the stars. The Alaska sky was clear and vast, filled with more stars than Sarah had ever seen in the city. Mama, Maya asked, do you ever wish we hadn't found the treasure? That we'd just stayed in that cabin and never opened the hatch? Sarah thought about it, about how much easier life might have been if they'd never discovered the underground chamber. No media attention, no pressure, no danger, just two people surviving quietly in the wilderness. But then she thought about Anna Kowalski seeing her great-aunt's portrait for the first time, about the families who had recovered pieces of their history, about the 300 families the foundation had helped, about the life Maya had now, full of opportunity and hope. No, Sarah said firmly, I don't wish that at all, because sometimes the scariest doors are the ones that lead to the most important places. Sometimes you have to walk into the dark to find the light. Maya nodded, leaning her head on her mother's shoulder. I'm glad we opened it. I'm glad we told the truth. Me too, baby, Sarah whispered. Me too. Years later, when Maya graduated from Harvard with a degree in social work, when she gave her valedictorian speech about the power of second chances, when she talked about a cold night in Alaska that had changed everything, Sarah sat in the audience and cried, not from sadness, but from overwhelming pride and gratitude. They had started with nothing, less than nothing. They had been invisible people in an invisible crisis, overlooked and forgotten by a world that had moved on without them. But they had survived. More than survived. They had transformed their pain into purpose, their struggle into strength, their darkest moment into a beacon of hope for others. Because that's what Sarah and Maya had learned in that frozen cabin beneath the Alaskan sky. That treasure isn't measured in dollars or gold. It's measured in moments of courage, in choosing truth over comfort, in believing that even when you have nothing, you still have the power to do good, to make things right, to leave the world a little better than you found it. A homeless mother and her 9-year-old daughter had found $275 million worth of stolen treasure. But what they really found was something far more valuable. They found their strength. They found their purpose. They found proof that no matter how dark the storm, no matter how cold the night, morning always comes for those brave enough to keep walking. And sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones we never knew we were looking for, the ones that find us when we need them most, the ones that remind us that we were never as lost as we thought we were. We were just on our way home. Anyone can survive the coldest winter if they remember that spring is coming and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is keep walking toward the light. As the northern lights danced across the Alaska sky years after that fateful storm, Sarah Thompson sat on her porch, reflecting on the journey that had taken her from the edge of desperation to the center of purpose. She had learned that poverty doesn't define character, that homelessness doesn't mean hopeless, and that sometimes, when you think you're at your end, you're really just at your beginning. The mechanic's daughter, who once thought she had nothing to offer the world, had become living proof that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about doing, the right thing even when you're terrified. Because for Sarah, and for Maya, and for every person who has ever felt invisible, forgotten, or beyond saving, their story stands as testament that second chances are real, that justice matters, and that one moment of moral courage can echo through generations. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that doing the right thing always matters, no matter the cost.